for example. A Jew said to Umar, one of the esteemed companions of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, you have a passage in your book which if we had it in ours, we would know when it was revealed, where it was revealed, and it would be a feast day for us. And Umar said, which passage is that? And the Jew quoted this. And Umar said, we know when it was revealed, we know where it was revealed, and it was on a Friday, and a Friday for Muslims is like a feast day. Okay. Also, we have left nothing out of this book. Okay. So everything we need to know is in the book. And we know that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, was the one who was given the hikmah, the wisdom, to interpret the Quran. How did Islam come to the UK? Now, those of you who aren't from the UK, I would suggest that what you do is you try to work out for yourselves how Islam came to your country. When you talk in your own country, how do you know your background? Perhaps you will know it. When you don't, perhaps you don't. Okay? This is one of the first associations of Islam with the UK. This is King Arthur's dinar. It's gold. On one side it says King Arthur. On the other side it says La ilaha illallah. Okay? This is in the British Museum. And some people say because of it that this particular king, who died around about 796, actually was a Muslim. That's not true. At least I don't believe it. Okay? There's no evidence that he was a Muslim. And in fact there's evidence that his daughters became Christians. So this, I think, was a gold dinar that was struck specifically for trade with the Arabs, probably with Spain, probably with North Africa. Okay? And you can compare it with the Abbasid dinar. I have it somewhere else, but I haven't put it on these particular slides. I've got enough on here to go through. Okay? This is the second thing, and this Ballycotton cross is a cross which was found in Ireland, at Ballycotton, funnily enough, and in the centre, there, it actually says Allah. You can't read it, but it does. Take my word for it. Okay? That's the best evidence I've got for it, alright? And that's circa the 9th century. Okay? So moving on. What happened then? The Crusades. Now, I don't want to talk about the negative side of the Crusades. I want to talk about the positive side of the Crusades. Because there was a tremendous amount of knowledge exchanged between the Muslims, the lands where the Crusaders went, and the Crusaders. Massive positive impact for Europe. The first university, well, it's actually the second, Al-Azhar, in the 10th century. Oxford and Cambridge universities were 2 centuries later. Okay? This is the first university, and this is from the Guinness Book of Records, and this is in Morocco. And 859 seal. Al-Azhar, 975. And Oxford was 1100 and something, I forget what, maybe 75, but I'm guessing now, so don't take that as being correct. Okay? Also, they collected ancient manuscripts, they translated the work of Greek, Roman scholars, they lent to the public, they catalogued books, the concept of Muslim libraries was copied by Christian monks, and they're introduced to the world as today's libraries. All this came out of Islamic concept of knowledge. In Dar al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom in Cairo, there are 18,000 ancient books. Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, Harun Rashid defeated the Roman king, and he said the Muslims will translate all the books in possession of the Romans. Al-Hakam in Spain, 400,000 books. Ali Ammar in Tripoli, Libya, 1 million books. And then the Tartars conquered Baghdad, destroyed the libraries. The Crusaders destroyed libraries in Jerusalem, Gaza and Tripoli. The Spanish Inquisition, 1 million books were burnt in one day. Now, anyone who's been taught about science and civilization knows that there's a missing period. And that missing period is from the 5th century to the 16th century, known as the Dark Ages in Europe. And then they talk about the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and modern day civilization, so it came out of the Renaissance, but it might have. But what sparked the Renaissance? What's this missing gap that no one talks about, that you don't get in your history books? It's a time when the Muslim, or the Muslim Empire, was at its highest peak. While modern Western-bounded civilization shares many of these traits, the civilization I'm talking about was the Islamic world from the year 800 to 1600, which included the Ottoman Empire and the courts of Baghdad, Damascus and Cairo, and enlightened rulers like Suleiman the Magnificent. And this is by the chief CEO, or the chief executive officer of HP, Fiorentina. And that's the lecture she gave on the stage. Okay, and she went on to be a politician. So this is not from a Muslim, it's from a non-Muslim. And that's this missing gap, the Dark Ages. Only they don't give the credit to the Muslims. This civilization was driven more than anything by invention. The architects designed buildings that defied gravity. The mathematicians created the algebra and algorithms that would enable the building of computers and the creation of encryption. Its doctors examined the human body and found new cures for diseases. Its astronomers looked into the heavens, named the stars and paved the way for space travel and exploration. Its writers created thousands of stories, stories of courage, romance and magic. Its poets wrote of love, when others before them were too steeped in fear to think of such things. When other nations were afraid of ideas, this civilization thrived on them and kept them alive. When censors threatened to wipe out knowledge from past civilizations, this civilization kept the knowledge alive and passed it to others. While modern Western civilization shares many of these traits, the civilization I'm talking about was the Islamic world from the year 800 to 1600. That's the actual text of her speech. It's on the internet, that's where I got it from. Okay. Moving on. Crusaders brought back knowledge of personal hygiene, bathing. So you want to read about the plague of London, the fire of London and so on. They brought back sugar and class production, textile manufacturing, castle fortification, the spirit of chivalry. They also brought back knowledge of hospitals, medicine, surgery. Before, hospitals were only a place where they kept the sick. Didn't actually treat the sick. They kept them. Chemistry, geography, astronomy, algebra, logarithms, mathematics, including the zero. Perhaps a day basis for today's advanced technology. And, don't forget the English garden. Okay? Place for relaxation. Okay? Transfer of knowledge was by pilgrims, translation work, university learning. Adelaide of Bath, for instance, did a lot of translation work in 1125. 1213, King John was excommunicated. He offered to help the Muslims in their campaign against Spain. Okay? So there was interaction between Muslims and non-Muslims. The effect of Muslim Spain on Europe cannot be overstated. Pilgrims travelling to Spain and Sicily took back knowledge to England. After Muslim Spain fell, it was the vast translation work, notably at Toledo, that explains the decisive changes that took place during the 12th century in Western Europe and the rise of Western learning in the West. There was a chair at Oxford, for instance, when the university was first opened, for Arabic, because Arabic was the knowledge-based language. If you wanted to learn what was going on in the world, you learned Arabic. Henry II's tutor, Adelaide of Bath, was one of the first Englishmen known to be a scholar of Arabic. He travelled to Syria and to Muslim Spain and translated a number of Arabic texts into Latin. Right? Moving on. Chaucer, in 1386, wrote the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. There is among the pilgrims wending their way to Canterbury a doctor of physic, whose learning included Razi, Avicenna, and Averroes. So they knew these people. They knew about these people in that time. Okay? Muslim scholarship was well known among the educated in Britain by 1386 when Chaucer was writing. And Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine was a standard text for medical students for over 400 years, up until the 17th century, in European centres of learning for medicine. The first book printed by Caxton in England was a translation of an Arabic book. Cromwell in 1649. And indeed, Christians will but diligently read and observe the laws and history of the Mohammedans, Muslims. They may blush to see how zealous they are in works of devotion, piety and charity, how devout, cleanly and reverent in their mosques, how obedient to their imams. Okay. So we had qualities, Muslims had qualities that were known, and not by the ordinary man necessarily, but by the leaders of the countries, and in this case respected. He went on, we now at this time require the like of you have declared yourselves hitherto in all things to be men loving righteousness, hating wrong and observing faithfulness in covenant. Look at the change we've got today compared to what was being said then. And not by any ordinary person. This is Cromwell. Maybe a scribe, but he's telling him what to write. Okay. Now let's have a quick look at the colonialism. 1804 to 1809, the Sokoto Jihad, the Imam Mahdi in Africa. 1830 to 1847, the Algerian Jihad of Abu Qadir. 1832, it was known as the Slaves Revolt, and it's been written as the Slaves Revolt, but there's a strong argument for it being a jihad by Muslims, who when they were shipped over to Jamaica and the West Indies, that all the Qurans were thrown overboard. Then there was something in Brazil, which they say it was not a jihad, but could be likened to a jihad, and the jihad in Nigeria. Then we come to 1840, 1870, the jihad of Imam Shamil in Chechnya. And in 1857, in what was India, the so-called rebellion. An Islamic State was proclaimed at Balakot, defeated in death. Over 60,000 scholars were killed. Now, what I'm trying to show you here is that from the colonial period, there has been vast changes in the way Islam has been looked at, and how we've been able to practice Islam, and how the knowledge of Islam has or has not been preserved. And this is why it's necessary to look at your own countries. The ulama, the scholars, were targeted by the colonial forces. Okay? And I'm going to show you a little bit about India. Ulama therefore became the main target of the British oppression and persecution. The word Mulvi was synonymous to rebel in the British eyes. Out of approximately 200,000 people martyred during the revolt, more than 51,200 were ulama. Some of you may remember the book which Ahmadinejad read when he started, or before he started, on his dawah. And this was a book which was written by Maulana Karwani in India, and it was out of a debate he had with the top Christian missionary in India at that time. They had a discussion, and they said that they would have a debate. And whoever won the debate, the other person would embrace his religion. And Karwani took it on with a missionary from Britain. The first one was inconclusive. They had a second one, and the missionary ran away. The ulama were targeted, and Karwani actually went to Turkey. The Sultan in Turkey advised him to write his book, and that's where the book came from, and that's how it's in existence today. Okay? But this is an example of how the scholars were targeted and killed. Now, if so many were killed, how do we get our Islam today? And from whom? And where is the break or the interruption that has happened in the educational cycles, and how much benefit or lack of it do we have today? You'll see it gets worse. In Delhi alone, 500 ulama. Wow. Ulama in this case means scholars, senior members of the community.